All right, let's talk about West Texas. When you picture it, you probably think of vast, flat plains, right? Just endless landscapes that go on forever. But what if I told you that hidden deep beneath all that flatness, there's a secret? A massive geological structure, a lost world that's been buried for 300 million years.
So what in the world is it? We're talking about something buried a mile and a half deep, a structure so enormous that it puzzled geologists for decades. It's this incredible feature that is anything but flat, hiding right under our feet.
Just to wrap your head around the scale here, let's look at the numbers. From east to west, this thing stretches for 90 miles. That's like driving from one side of a major city to the other and back again, all while staying on top of this one single buried feature.
And it's not just wide, it's tall. At its highest point, it rises almost 3,000 feet from the ancient seafloor. That's taller than the tallest skyscraper in Texas. So the obvious question is, how on earth do we even know it's there?
Well, we know about it thanks to some pretty remarkable technology that lets us see deep into the Earth without ever lifting a shovel. Think of it like a sonogram, but for the planet.
Now, the technology to see underground has come a long, long way. The very first clues back in the 1930s came from a method that was, well, let's just say a bit blunt. We're talking literally setting off dynamite in shallow holes. Compare that to today, where these giant trucks send precise vibrations into the ground, giving us these incredibly high-resolution pictures of what's down there.
The process itself is actually pretty brilliant. You create sound waves, they travel down and bounce off all the different rock layers. Then, these super-sensitive listening devices called geophones, they're basically high-tech microphones for the Earth. They record the echoes. A computer takes all that data and turns it into an image. And that's how we got our first glimpse of this massive C-shaped anomaly.
Okay, so once geologists saw the shape, the real detective work began. They had this image of a giant rimmed structure, and they had to figure out what it was. And let me tell you, the first theories were pretty wild.
The initial thought, the first big idea was, could this be a massive ancient volcano? You know, its shape was definitely giving off some serious Yellowstone caldera vibes, just way, way bigger. And you can totally see why they thought that, right? The seismic data showed this huge feature with a really well-defined rim. On paper, it looked just like the remnant of a supervolcano. And if it was, it would have been twice the size of Yellowstone. But then came the drill bit. In 1938, the very first well punched down into this thing, and the rock chips that came back to the surface told a completely different story. It was limestone, the kind of rock that forms in ancient oceans. There was zero volcanic rock. So, with one simple well, the volcano theory was dead in the water.
Okay, so if it's not a volcano, what else makes a giant circular hole in the ground? The next logical suspect on the list, a massive impact crater from a meteor.
Now, this was another really strong theory. I mean, the famous meteor crater out in Arizona, it has a raised rim, and, just as important, it was formed in limestone. Our mystery feature had a raised rim, and we knew it was made of limestone. The pieces really seemed to fit.
But again, the rocks themselves held the final answer. Later on, new wells were able to pull up solid cylinders of rock, what we call core samples. And when geologists looked closely, they didn't find the shattered, pulverized rock you'd expect from a cataclysmic impact. No, instead, they found delicate, layered fossils of ancient algae. The mystery was getting deeper.
So, limestone and marine fossils, this was the key. This was the moment everything changed. It meant this entire structure wasn't formed by some violent event, but that it grew, slowly, over millions of years, in a warm, shallow ocean that covered Texas 300 million years ago.
A C-shaped limestone structure that grew in the ocean? That sounds exactly like an atoll. You know, one of those ring-shaped reefs like you see in the Maldives today. The shape was a perfect match, the rock type was a perfect match. It really seemed like the case was closed.
But hold on, there was one final, baffling twist. If this was a giant reef, where was all the coral? Modern reefs are built by corals, but the core samples from this ancient one had almost none. So if coral didn't build this colossal structure, what did?
To answer that, you have to remember that Earth's history is incredibly long, and the main characters in the story change. The dominant creatures building reefs have shifted dramatically over time. The corals we know and love today, they're actually pretty recent players. Our structure is from the Pennsylvanian Permian period, which points us to a very different kind of building.
And here it is, the unlikely architect of this megastructure, phyloid algae. Just try to picture huge underwater fields of plants that looked like plates of lettuce but were made of calcite. They didn't build skeletons like coral. Instead, they grew in these dense thickets that trapped or baffled mud and sand between their leafy fronds. Layer by layer, over millions of years, this humble algae built a solid limestone mountain from the seafloor.
With the mystery finally solved, geologists gave it a name, the Horseshoe Atoll, and its scale is it's staggering. At its peak, it was 4 times larger than the biggest atoll on the entire planet today, an entire lost world built by algae.
But the story doesn't end there, not even close. Because as this ancient atoll was buried over millions of years, it transformed from a biological wonder into something else entirely, a massive geological treasure chest.
So how did that happen? Well, it was the perfect geological recipe. The deep basin around the reef filled up with mud rich in organic material. As all that got buried deeper, the heat and pressure cooked it, turning all that organic stuff into oil. Oil is light, so it started to migrate upwards, and it found the perfect home in the porous, sponge-like rock of the ancient reef. To top it all off, a layer of impermeable shale acted like a perfect lid, trapping all that oil inside.
And the amount of oil it trapped? It's almost unbelievable. To date, the oil fields located along the rim of the Horseshoe Atoll have produced a mind-boggling 2.7 billion barrels of oil.
And this is where the story of ancient algae crashes into the story of the modern world. This discovery didn't just make a few people rich, it kicked off something called the Texas Reef Boom. The oil from this one single algae-built feature was a critical fuel source for the American economy in those booming years after World War II, fundamentally shaping the world we all live in today.
To me, this is the most exciting part of it all. The Horseshoe Atoll was a complete surprise, an entire lost world hidden right under our noses. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As we walk across the seemingly familiar landscapes of our planet, what other ancient worlds, what other incredible stories are still down there, just waiting to be discovered, buried deep beneath our feet?